I suppose good evening, everybody. It is great to see so many people logged on for the continuation of this series of webinars around that central theme of future-proofing your business. Again, the team at the LOETB have pulled out all the stops and got together two fantastic speakers this evening. Just a couple of quick points to note first. The webinar is being recorded. However, because it's done as a webinar, only the speakers will be visible in the recordings as well. So just to let you know of that. We'll keep the usual format. Question and answers can be put to the panelists or any questions you might have for anybody in the LOETB through the question and answer function that you'll see at the bottom of the page. We've a crackpot team monitoring the Q&A function there too. So always happy to put your questions to today's participants. Our running order, Yvonne Foy from the LOETB is going to come on in a minute and just give us a 2 or 3 minute overview of particular services that the LOETB have to offer for business owners and for SMEs in Laois and Offaly. We'll then move into our main speaker, who is Laura Delizonna. Laura will talk to us for maybe 10 or 15 minutes on that topic of psychological safety at work. A really interesting topic. It first emerged back in the 1960s and then really to kind of gain significance in the 1990s. And it's such a relevant topic in these days. And I think it'll be pleasantly surprised too. It covers areas that you may not expect it to. And really it's about creating winning and high-performing teams and giving people that space to be themselves and to make mistakes, something that we're not very good at occasionally in Ireland, allowing people to make mistakes. Laura's going to bring her keynote speech to us very shortly. Afterwards then, we'll be joined by Martin Minnock of ACETECH Global. And if you've never heard of ACETECH Global, after this you'll probably go, wow, how have I never heard of this company before? Or even if you do know about them, you'll probably find that you're learning new stuff about them all the time. Such has been the trajectory of their growth over the past couple of years. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. It is Yvonne Foy from the Laois Offaly Education and Training Board. You're very welcome, Yvonne.
Thanks very much, Ronan. Sorry, I was very nearly on mute there, which is probably running into 2021 now as well as 2020. Sorry, thanks a million. My name is Yvonne. I work with Laois and Offaly ETB as part of the Enterprise Support and Development team. LOETB as a whole are responsible for providing education and training programs across Laois and Offaly from levels...
Yeah, we'll let you away with it once more, Yvonne.
Sorry, is there a bit of feedback, Ronan? Apologies. Sorry. So more specifically, I suppose, on the training side, which is my side of the house, we are responsible for apprenticeships and some other program headings, which I won't go into, but basically our focus is supporting enterprise employees across the 2 counties. So our areas of focus and how these webinars came up are on future jobs, and more specifically, I suppose, lately around digitalization and the green economy. So you'll see all the linkages coming up through the 2 speakers, I've no doubt. What we really want these webinars to do is just to get our brand awareness out there, to let you know that we're here for start, to meet any training needs that you have, whether that's bespoke training needs, off-the-shelf training needs, whatever it is. If there's areas that you think you need to upskill your employees on, or if there are job areas or growth areas of potential job creation, etc., just please let us know, and we'll be able to hopefully step in and help you out with that. Our contact details, sorry, are just in the background there, so please feel free to give any of us a shout. If it's just a general question or on any of our suite of programs, just give us a shout and let us know. Our focus is to try and support you in as much as we can, and hopefully you enjoyed the 2 speakers this afternoon. Thanks, Ronan. Sorry, I hope you can hear me. I think I went a bit funny there.
Yeah. No, we got you loud and clear, Yvonne. Thank you very much. And again, the contact details are there for anybody who'd like to get in touch. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker too, as we're delighted to be joined by Dr. Laura Delizonna. Laura is a PhD and she's a Stanford University instructor, an international speaker, author and executive coach with expertise in psychological safety, optimal team performance, leadership effectiveness, and thriving in life in general. She delivers practical, interactive, science-based trainings and inspiring keynote speeches, as you're about to discover. Laura, you're very welcome to Laois and Offaly, of course, as it is, has been for the last year, virtually and digitally, and it has been great because we've been able to get keynote speakers from all around the world to bring us these key topics. So very much looking forward to your talk. Don't forget to unmute yourself now. And if anybody has any particular questions for Laura, feel free, pop them in the Q&A section below and we'll put them to Laura at the end of her talk. And I'll invite both panelists back on at the end of the webinar as well for any further questions that you might have. Laura, you're very welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here today. It's a pleasure, and I so enjoyed last time. So I'm very much looking forward to being with you once again. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I believe that it is even more important today. I fall in love with this topic even more every day because of its importance, its depth, and how it just cuts across so many aspects of our humanity. So today I want to focus on how to lead psychologically safe teams and give you some insights into some key essential actions that leaders can take and organizations can focus on. First, I want to frame this is that we are in this challenge that was here even before 2020, where things were changing out in the business landscape on a global level. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, so difficult to forecast and predict what is going to happen in a year from now, sometimes not even in a week from now, as we see. And this complexity and interdependence that we now face as a global society and as business people operating in this environment. So to really make the case from the very beginning that we need to change our skill sets, our old skill sets, the traditional work harder, just doesn't work anymore. It does not cut it. It will not lead to success. But instead, we really need to bring this new way of thinking, these new skills to meet this, what is sometimes referred to as this VUCA world. It is indeed a time to reimagine. How could we create a better future? And I believe that there are hints from this from our ancestors who've been whispering this for millennia. Finally, perhaps we will heed the call from the African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, you must go together. So that is our task, is how can we move together, bring our ideas together at a global scale within our companies, organizations, and even within our families and teams. So far out and close up. Let's define psychological safety. Psychological safety, I use the definition from Amy Edmondson, who is the frontier person who's really defined this. It's an interpersonal climate where people feel safe to take risks and be vulnerable. This includes bringing their ideas, their input, their challenging the status quo, saying, I don't agree, or I don't know. This is an interpersonal, these invisible forces that shape our relationships. They shape the way we interact, our assumptions, and ultimately the solutions that we find. Most people would agree with this and they would say, okay, I know what psychological safety feels like. When I have it, I like it. And when I don't have it, I don't like it. But the thing is, most people get psychological safety wrong. There's this misconception that if it's a safe environment, it's a nice environment. And that is flat out wrong. Some of the least psychologically safe environments that I've been, and I was in a startup that was so nice. Oh, first I felt very frustrated. My voice wasn't being heard. Others as well were starting to disengage. That's what happens in an unsafe environment. And eventually there was this talent bleed. One by one, including myself, we left the organization. It is not about being nice. It is not about job security, not about making everyone feel good and sugarcoating feedback. It's not about being agreeable. In fact, in high psychologically safe environments, we can dispute, offer opposing opinions. There's active debate. There's care with candor. Hard feedback is given and it's received as a gift. Instead, psychological safety is the answer to an evolutionary-based question. And that question is, are you with me or against me? The answer to this question is going to result in a whole host of very natural and predictable behaviors. When the answer is no, we are social animals. We'll detect it like that. We go into avoidance, we go into defense. It might look like avoiding conflict, knowing that there's this person that you just can't talk to. Hiding errors. You're not going to be the first one to say, whoops, I made a mistake, because you know what will happen then. Blame, criticism, not me, them. Excessive image management. I've heard this in high-tech companies, especially, where people say that, oh, you know, everyone in the meeting is just trying to prove how smart they are, rather than really getting down to business. Silence can also be a sign of low psychological safety. On the other hand, when there is a high level of psychological safety, when I feel like you are my team member, you are truly my team member, you are with me, we are better together, then there's positive conflict, there's active debate, a readiness to say, hey, you know what, I made a mistake, or I'm not gonna make this deadline, I need help. Finding win-win solutions, feedback is given with candor, but with care. Not bullying and trying to one up, or that toxic competition that sometimes can be insidious and subtle. And then constructive feedback. And that's why the research shows over and over again now that in the highest performing teams, it's very predictable. Google asked this question: what's the difference between our highest performing teams and our average teams? Not even our worst teams, just our average teams. And they found that there were 4 predictable characteristics: having meaning, structure and clarity. Everyone knows what to do and says what they do, dependability. And the number 1 factor was psychological safety. It matters. And as Paul Santagata, who I interviewed as a head of industry at Google, said, he summed it up. He said, there is no team without trust. This is really fascinating because it just shows how human we are, and we bring our human selves to work, whether we're going into the front door of our home or the front door of our office or the front door of our virtual conference. Trust is the foundation of all relationships. We know this in social psychology. Trust predicts happy, healthy marriages, family harmony, and it even predicts crime at a societal level. Trust matters. So I want to give you real quick an overview of the how. I sum it up in the 4 C's of high-performing teams. When individuals, and this operates at an individual level, it's every small decision on a moment-to-moment basis. When we make the choice, self-awareness, and active management of our own impulses to, and I'll talk about this more, courage, bringing curiosity and commitment. Those are the environments where we can create psychological safety. Choice is summed up with this beautiful quote by Viktor Frankl. Between a stimulus and a response is a space. And in that space, we have the power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. In a sense, what I'm referring to here is that the essential importance of responding versus reacting, and knowing that how you do this is your impact. So this involves self-awareness. This involves a radical responsibility, the ability to respond intentionally, to shift your focus, mindset, attitude, and behaviors. Just going to go through these quickly. The second C of psychologically safe teams is courage. Now, most people consider vulnerability a weakness, but it's not. Vulnerability is a choice, and it's a courageous choice. It's not about, giving up the helm and letting the ship toss at sea, but instead it's about being honest with the messy, being willing to admit mistakes, discuss your failures, your learning journey, to be upfront with that. And when a leader does this, it is the #1 behavior that they can take to shape the psychological safety in a team. It's allowing that emotional exposure to say those 3 words in the English language that we least like to, which is, I need help. It presents the message that we can truly be human around here. Just a tool for you real quick is that, to share your learning journey, we can use this sort of story arc to express a positive intention. I was working really hard in that startup. I was the chief learning officer. It was my dream job. And then people started to talk over each other. There started to be a lack of transparency in leadership. All sorts of negative surprises happened. I noticed I started to get defensive, quiet, and silence. In hindsight, what I would have done is I would have spoke up, had one-on-one meetings with the president and the CEO and said, there's a problem here and we need to fix it, because otherwise our company is going to crash and burn. And that's exactly what it did. And in part, for me and others, we made the mistake of not calling it out soon enough. So share that learning journey. That's how we can really walk the talk and say, you know what, I'm not perfect, you're not perfect, no one has the answers here, and that's just the way it is. It's a VUCA world, and we got to figure it out together. We are stronger together. 3, I'm just summarizing these very quickly, is curiosity. Conflict is a call for curiosity. And when we bring that type of curiosity, empathy, listening, seeing the common humanity, not just the differences, but the way that we have a common vision, hopes, dreams, fears, and insecurities, then we can sit up to the table and have the discussions as human to human. This shifts from negative conflict and escalation to positive conflict, where we can make that tough decision to be effective rather than right, proving just how right I am and how wrong you are, right? So we can make that decision. Again, all of these build off of each other, starting with choice, having the courage to say, I don't know, or emotional exposure, I'm overwhelmed, curiosity. And this is so important in diverse teams, especially, because if it is expensive to be yourself, what are you going to do? You're going to self-protect, duck and cover, right? And so as leaders, it's crucial to provide air cover for candor, to watch the social friction and address it head on. Call that elephant out in the room. Talk about relationship dynamics. Do check-ins. How are we doing here? How did that land for you? How could we improve the way we're communicating so that the social friction is lower than the intellectual friction, which is what we want. That's the juice of innovation and creativity. The thing about diverse teams is that we know from the research, they make better decisions. They're more creative and more innovative. That's why they succeed. However, they are also feel more uncomfortable. There tends to be greater conflict and less social integration. The hanging out, the natural coming together in casual ways happens less often is the tendency. So it does not guarantee inclusion, which is what needs to happen to have those high performing teams to reap the benefits of the diversity and get that rich climate of diversity of thought. The higher the diversity, the higher the psychological safety needs to be. And the last one, 4. The 4th C is commitment. This is about putting the rubber to the road. This is saying, even in the hard times, I'm going to choose to serve my values, my vision, because that's how change happens. That's how we reach our dreams, aspirations, our innovations, and success. Goals without action and commitment, they're just a fantasy. They're just word talk. So what specific action from what we've talked about today could you commit to? What resonated with you? What would you commit to? What will you commit to take, and when, to build the psychological safety in your team, in your one-on-one relationships, in your organization? Other books and supports, I encourage people to listen to podcasts, to go out and read all that you can, to watch TED Talks on different topics and related topics. These are some examples of what I have available, but it's important to get these concepts from multiple avenues, from multiple dimensions in order to integrate. So I end now with a belief I have. It's not that most people ask too much of themselves. It's that they ask too little. Why not dare to discover ways that we can elevate each other, that we can not just cooperate, but care, that we cannot just bring an obedience, but bring a loyalty, bring a spirit of discovery, so that we might elevate each other and humanity even to the unimaginable. Thank you.
Wow, I think, thank you, Laura. We'll come to it, I think, a little later, but I think you're after kind of shattering some of the kind of pillars of maybe what people perceive as being what they look for from their career, but we'll touch on those in a few minutes. Again, to all the participants, please, questions through the question and answer function on the screen there if you'd like. Glad to put them towards Laura, but I first heard of the term VUCA about 5 years ago, and it was in referral to maybe a kind of a changing geopolitical landscape and maybe the imminent rise of a certain individual in the United States who subsequently became president. And I think it was never there maybe going to predict what was to come, particularly in the last year, when we look at the effect that the pandemic and everything has had on businesses across the world. But I suppose now more than ever, companies are probably striving to build that psychological safety. So to begin, a roadmap for a small to medium enterprise. So we're talking companies, maybe 10 to 50 employees. How might a company go about creating a roadmap to build that psychological safety within their company?
Yeah, so first of all, to realize that psychological safety happens in every single relationship. It happens on one-on-one relationships, in teams, and in organizations. So to start thinking as the leader of, first of all, where are we? Do a self-assessment, do a team assessment. How much psychological safety do we feel? So there's a 7-item, just simply 7 questions that you can ask to assess the psychological safety in a team. You can do it in informal ways, in pulse surveys, in conversation of how much do you feel that you can bring your ideas, your input, challenge the ideas that others are bringing out in the team meetings. How much do you feel heard? Do you feel, to what extent do you feel that if you make a mistake that there will be repercussions, or do you feel readily able to discuss them? So that's one, is assess. Where are we? Most leaders overestimate the amount of psychological safety that their team members feel. Why? Because the leader tends to feel more psychological safety. So if you feel a high level, that's not to be projected and assumed that others feel that with you. There are power differentials. Even the best intended leaders can sometimes be met with a stark realization that their team doesn't feel completely psychologically safe. Then to do that, the number one action is to share the learning journey, admit mistakes. It's not enough to say, it's safe to make mistakes around here. That's just lip speak. You need to show it, demonstrate. So actions speak way louder than words. Show that it's okay to make errors, to make mistakes, and also define what an unacceptable error is so that people know where the guardrails are, right? Because there are unacceptable errors. And so describe those, show your own, start with your own vulnerability. And then the second piece is really going to that curiosity and making sure that input happens, that everyone's voice is truly welcomed in the room. You can do simple things like, to get input, of having, calling it out in a very specific way. In a small organization, it's not truly going to be anonymous. Large organizations, you can do a suggestion box that's anonymous, but let's face it, in a smaller team or organization, everyone knows who says what and who thinks what. So that's not a good way to go, but instead to call it out and say, let's have a candor break, for example. What's not being said right now? If we were going down the wrong path, how would we be doing that? Assign a so-called devil's advocate or a tiger team, so that it is their job to call it out, to challenge that status quo.
Because when it comes to building trust, then, and then people can be quite different. Some people will automatically give their trust. Other people's, it has to be earned as well. So if you're dealing with multidisciplinary teams and maybe different age groups, different generations within the company, what are good ways of looking at, number one, about determining the level of trust that already exists between your team, and then trying to really build upon that?
Yeah, it's an important realization that some people are coming in with higher and lower levels of trust. So that's a good observation. And to know that that is influenced by history, by past experiences, by assumptions, by also if they see themselves as in the majority in the in-group or in the minority. Naturally, if you see yourself as different, as other, as in the minority, that is by social definition a less safe place to be. So extra efforts need to be made in diverse teams. And remember that diversity includes racial diversity, gender diversity, but it also includes age diversity, geographic diversity, expertise diversity, and simply having a different way of thinking. So to really be actively inclusive, getting the conversation going. Remember that silence is often assumed to mean, it is interpreted as agreement, but usually it's the opposite. Silence indicates that things are less safe, or it could be misunderstanding. But if there's silence, your antennas should go up and start asking why.
Yeah, I suppose, and again, like from the coaching perspective as well, the value of that silence can never be kind of overemphasized too, that it's not, I think certainly Irish people have a tendency as well to fill the space. If there's a gap in a conversation, fill it with something else, be it a question, a throw or a remark, whatever it might be. But I mentioned earlier how you've looked and almost kind of taken down some of those kind of pillars of working life, or as it has been in a country like Ireland for a long time. I mean, looking at things like job security. I had this discussion with somebody last night. We were talking about how sports teams now recruit new players and how they buy players. A lot of it's based on data. And we just had a hypothetical discussion that possibly recruitment might go that way. So people will be on short-term contracts, but they'll be brought in to do a function and then possibly move on. Again, a lot has changed, I think, in the last year about our perception of our job and our role. But I think particularly in Ireland, we have a huge thing around not being seen to be wrong. And those three words, I don't know, or I need help as well. I would suggest a lot of people are still, I'm going to say petrified, are really, really afraid to ask that question. So in terms of, introducing that into a team, into your organization, right? Okay, the leader will have a huge role in it. But how can you give people that sense of security that they can make those mistakes and actually put their hands up and say, sometimes I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be doing here?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because let's face it, nobody likes to be wrong. We don't like to get negative feedback. We don't want to be seen as we grow. We want to be seen when we are complete, competent, and successful, right? Final product. But that's not how success happens. That's not how innovation happens. It happens by getting dirty, messy, and by truly saying, like, we've never been here before. So there's a clue. Set the stage is the first thing. Set the stage expectations that it's a VUCA world. We are in a landscape that we have never been in before. No one in this room has the answers. Not me, not you, nobody. Therefore, we need to figure it out. We need to do learning experiments. We need to fail, because if we're not failing at our small bet experiments, then we're playing small. Then we're not actually making experiments. We're just doing what we know will work. And therefore, we need to stretch ourselves outside of that comfort zone, outside of that knowledge zone, to get into, you know, this sort of messy, swampy waters, right? Into the fog where we don't know where we're going, and we truly have to find our way, which means we will get lost, and then we'll find our way back. And then we will learn. We will learn through those experiments. That's where the growth happens. That's where the change happens. That's where the juice happens, because that's critical feedback. So set the expectation that it is your job to not know, to go into those levels, to those areas. It is your job to disagree and to bring opposing views, to tell me how I'm wrong or how we might be going astray. That is an expectation, and then reward the messenger. So actively, publicly reward people who call things out. And we're not talking in rude and polite ways, you know, the sort of, we can do this with care and candor. But when someone sticks their neck out, they're being brave. They are putting themselves on the line. They must be rewarded. The group is watching, and they're watching to see what happens when they stick their neck out and oppose, again, that status quo. So it's really important to set that stage. One example that I thought was really powerful and summed it up quite nicely is from Salesforce at the beginning of the pandemic. Mark Benioff was asked in a town hall with, you know, the entire company there, how are you going to lead this massive company through the pandemic? What are you going to do? And Mark said, I don't know. I have never led a company through a pandemic. We will figure it out together. I need your input. So to not expect that you as a leader or anyone else has the answer, but the truth is, I don't know.
Because I think something similar was kind of said about Zoom, you know, kind of ironically as we use it today, that they freely admitted, but we're not really sure, we're just reacting to this the same way everybody else is, and we can see the difference that is made. We have a couple of questions that have just come in. I'm going to put them to you very briefly, Laura. Somebody has asked, like, how do you go about breaking down defensiveness? Because, you know, generally people don't like to be challenged, even, you know, whether that's in a positive or a negative kind of context. So how would you go about kind of, you know, reducing that defensiveness?
Yeah. Go back to that fundamental question. Are you with me or against me? So think for yourself of when people have given you hard feedback, when you did get defensive and you were like, oh no, shut down. I'm not, you know, taking this. And also then contrast that to times when you were like, oh, that's hard to hear. And thank you. That was a real gift. I appreciate that. And a difference will be, I think you'll find, is that feeling of the relationship context. Is this being delivered in a way that is truly to help me grow, that respects my strengths, that sees my strengths, that sees my competency, separate the person from the problem, that is just, you know, sort of in a way, even if it's a big deal, it's no big deal. It's like, oh, you know, hey, Laura, you might consider, you know, some alternative way that might get you to your outcome better, you know, that in a spirit of that, as opposed to, you know, I think you need to think about something, right? Like if someone says that to me, I'm like, whoa, no, thank you.
Yeah.
So really think about first, where are you going and why?
It's such an important point, and I've often said, like, even from a lean management perspective, that to always bear in mind that you're critiquing the process and not the people. And I think if we could all even put that hat on from time to time, and the way we frame those questions is so important. Another person just asked about, from your experience and research to date, is there enough emphasis being placed by organizations on building psychological safety?
No, I can answer that quite simply. There's not, but some are. Okay, so yes and but. So some companies are really getting it, and that's why there's been a flood of response to the importance of psychological safety. That many people are coming to me, many leaders are coming to me and saying, we did this survey, we're really surprised. Our psychological safety is far lower in our company or my team than I thought it was, than we thought it was. And we need to solve for this. What do we do? And so it's, first it's sort of the companies and the cultures that are often already at least attuned to it, or they know the importance. They might not be getting it right. There might be toxic competition. There might be real problems in the way that people are feeling. People might be leaving, or they're falling behind and in their own goals and KPIs as an organization. But there's this appreciation for how we interact matters, communication matters, culture matters. And so there is a real responsiveness and taking it seriously that this needs to be solved for. Some companies are still, doing it the same old way they used to, and good luck to them.
Yeah, which kind of ties into another question that's come in, and I'm just going to put this one to you briefly, that how do you deal with, say, culture differences between teams where there's a distinct hierarchy within a company?
Yeah, this is a good question. So, first, that culture happens in microcultures. So we talk about organizational culture, right? But actually, what is culture? Culture, first off, is the norms and values and behaviors. And how does that happen? That actually is formed in microcultures, team by team, interaction by interaction. And so knowing that there can be vast differences, and I've heard this time and time again in large organizations, medium organizations, even smaller organizations. I feel safe with my manager, but I don't feel safe in the organization. Or I feel safe with my coworkers, but not with my manager. And so it happens in a small microculture level. And so then bringing efforts in, to break down those silos, to express, one way that this can be done is it's kind of simple in a way. It's not easy, but in a way it's simple. And that is expressing appreciation, value, seeing the contribution across teams. Sometimes there's a real us versus them. There's the legal team versus the marketing team. There's the sales team versus the, engineers, they're always saying like the sales team are over-promising, the engineers and the sales, so they have this sort of back and forth. But instead to say, to really bring into the room how we are interdependent. And we get that interdependence, we demonstrate that by saying, you are bringing something of value towards our greater goal. Making that explicit, and not just once a year in an awards ceremony where it's like somebody gets the Oscar, but it's on those small, simple conversations. It's in meeting by meeting where we pause for a moment and say, thank you. That contribution that you just made is going to help us do X, Y, Z. I appreciate that you demonstrate that you see them as a person. That took thought and patience and clear view. That's a strength you have. So I use this acronym called BIG recognition, where you identify the behavior that was the contribution. Specificity builds credibility. 2 is bring in the impact on you, on the team, on the outcome that you're working towards. And 3 is the G, is that greater strength or ability that you saw in them. When we give that type of recognition and appreciation, it changes the playing field. I mean, you'll be amazed if you start using just that simple template in small and big ways, how it will change the fabric and that interpersonal climate between you, your teams, and in relationships.
And even sometimes just listen to somebody, actually listen to them, as in actively listen, as opposed to just hearing them. You know, it can be huge. Laura, thank you so much. I'm going to ask you to stay on, because after Martin's speech as well, our talk, we'll have time for maybe a few more questions. There's loads coming in. A good few people have asked about maybe case studies or podcasts. So maybe later on, you might give us a couple of recommendations on that, or possibly even share a link to your HBR article. But Laura, thank you so much. Lots of food for thought there. So without further ado, I'm going to move on to our case study for today, and it is a fantastic company called ACETECH Global, and we're joined by Martin Minnock, their Chief Technology Officer. And Martin is, you'll see by his background, actually, he is sitting in their new offices. They moved, I think, was it sometime last year, Martin? Fantastic new premises in Tullamore. Again, a real indication of the scale of growth of the company. Martin is a technology leader with over 20 years experience of delivering excellence in the development and operation of enterprise level systems through crafting winning strategies and building highly engaged teams. How does he go about it? How does he do it? Well, he's here to tell us now. Martin, you're very welcome to the webinar.
Thank you very much. Hopefully, usual 2021 check-in, you can see my screen and you can hear me. So
loud and clear, yep.
Good stuff. Yes, this is a topic that's incredibly interesting to myself. I come at this from the perspective of somebody who is incredibly selfish and incredibly practical about what we can do with the power of psychological safety. A quick bit about ourselves. Yes, we are a technology firm and we are based in Tullamore in County Offaly, and we make software and hardware for use in emergency services vehicles. On screen, you see a couple of different screenshots of the type of thing that we're doing on the software side of the business. But we produce devices. The devices are installed into your ambulance or your fire engine, and they control the vehicle, but they also transmit data back to the cloud that you can then use as a fleet manager or an operations manager to find out what's going on. And maybe it's the vehicle, maybe it's the assets in the vehicle, but basically the idea is the same. We're in the data business for emergency services vehicles, and we're doing that right here in Tullamore in County Offaly. As Ronan alluded to, we recently moved into a fantastic new building right here in Central Business Park at the top end of Tullamore. This is equally a blessing and a curse. From the blessing point of view, anybody who has been to Tullamore or the surrounding environs knows what an amazing part of the country it really is. It's a beautiful place to live. It's a great place to raise a family. I've been here for a good long time, have many close friends and a big network of family. On the downside, if you are in the technology business, it can be difficult to recruit. It can be hard to get people into your team because there just isn't that much technology happening in the area. And so we are very, very careful about how we treat our teams and how we grow and how we are able to deliver a lot more with much smaller teams. ACETECH is made up of about 75 people at the moment. We do leverage some outsourcing to help us to deliver what we do, but we are a pretty small business, really. We're in the medium size and we're growing considerably. We're scaling worldwide, but we're doing this with a relatively small team. So it's very important to us that we are able to get as much as possible out of everybody who is in the mix. This presents an organizational challenge. From my perspective in particular, definitely in the past, you kind of get this idea that organizations are really pretty simple. If you're going to do a flat structure, then maybe that suits, but medium-sized orgs tend to be still quite hierarchical. And so we have a manager and they have maybe team leads, and then each of them has a certain number of people underneath them and so forth. Very traditional, very straightforward, and completely not true when you deal with the realities of how we try to recruit or hold on to people. We end up with this terrible mismatch of lopsided organizations, or maybe you as a manager are suddenly in charge of a whole group of people and it's quite a large number and it's very difficult to organize and so on and so forth. And so the reality bites, and it bites quite hard, and we're trying to figure out, how do we even manage this? And so from a selfish point of view, we try to nurture a new style of team structure that delivers a heck of a lot more with a heck of a lot less. So we start thinking about how we can organize ourselves in this cross-functional way. If you're making software, or if you're in the technology business, Agile, as an example, is a way of delivering an awful lot very quickly, and it's dependent on cross-functional teams. You may have a business analyst or an architect. You might have a data engineer or an analyst. You might have 2 software engineers and maybe a hardware person. They can't be expected to do everything on their own. No one person can deliver everything. And so we bring them together as a team. And in order for this team to work, they really need to trust each other. They really need to be able to openly communicate. And they all need to understand, managers included, that if we're inventing the future, or if we're trying to deliver against somebody's imagination around what they'd like to see in the marketplace, we've never done this before. Nobody has actually built the thing because it wouldn't be new, it wouldn't be change, it wouldn't be disruptive in the marketplace. So we have to accept that this is a new thing that we are pursuing. We've never done it before. And so admitting that I don't know what this really looks like, but we'll get there together, is an important driver. But again, speaking selfishly, I want lots of teams to be self-managing. I'd like them to organize themselves. I'd like them not to need a manager to constantly be telling them what to do, because they're never going to perform to a high level. And it makes the manager a bottleneck. The idea of every single decision, every single change, every single request going through one person is just not scalable in this world. Here we are with a small team trying to do things 4 corners of the globe. So we drive deliberately towards this concept of self-managing teams. And it's entirely dependent on trust and openness and knowing that it's okay to break things, that it's okay to have mistakes. It's okay to have a backup that you can roll back to in the event of some piece of software going wrong. In order to get towards that really selfish outcome of those self-managed teams, we look at what self-managed teams are all about. They're self-driven. They trust each other. They have that environment where they can make mistakes. They can make decisions. Empowering a team, and empowering is a bit of a strange word, but getting a team to make a decision and then see it through is a hard thing to get started when teams are so used to being driven by managers. We want them to be completely aware of what's going on around them. So we need to encourage asking questions, oftentimes awkward and dangerous questions. They need to be able to ask about the state of the business, the state of the market. They need to be able to express that they don't know something, that this idea of my identity is wrapped up in what I know is a blocker to achievement. It's not an enabler. And we need to be able to communicate, and we need to be able to communicate clearly. People need to be able to talk openly, ask probing questions. They need to be able to set their own goals. And they can't do this if they don't feel safe. If they don't feel safe to say the goal I'm putting forward is X, without some kind of fear of somebody stamping on them and saying that it's a silly goal or a bad goal. They need to be able to manage their time, and they need to be able to learn. But all of these things are predicated on the ability to be in an environment where you can speak freely, where you can make mistakes and learn from them, where you can every now and again need to roll back on the backup because you've made a mistake, and it's important and safe and healthy that you can do that. And this is me as a manager, as a person who has a bunch of teams trying to deliver, being outrageously selfish, because it just means that we can do more with less. But the truth of all of that is that it's the right thing to do. When you work in an environment where you are free to be yourself, you are free to work with people who are different from you, and you can learn from them and you can talk to them, then you end up like you see on the screen. This is us at an outing, a little part of the software engineering team back pre-COVID, and it was safe enough to go gun shooting. It was safe enough to go clear pigeon shooting, and nobody got hurt. A sure sign that we do have some level of trust and safety within our team. But like I say, it's important that we do these types of things with our team, because not only will they deliver, but they will truly be happier. It is a better environment. It's non-toxic, it's safe. It's a place where you can grow and you can learn and you can push forward together and to do something far more interesting. We're trying to invent the future, and not one of us have done it before. So when we start by saying that, we are able to achieve a heck of a lot more. That's a very, very quick run through of our case study. There's an awful lot more we could talk about. Clever little tricks that we use on the agile world, like using story pointing to try and find out if people know as much as they think they do, but again, in a way that allows people to talk about it. And maybe we can get into that in the Q&A, Ronan.
Yeah, certainly, Martin. Again, just questions rolling in there too. Thank you so much for that. In a kind of a bizarre kind of circular thing, the original picture you showed us of the building, as a young engineering student back in the early noughties, I actually marked out that lake, would you believe, for the builder. I was part of on the summer work, I was working with the developer at the time. So it's lovely to see that picture again. Martin, I'm going to get straight in though, because we're talking about psychological safety and that space to be seen to accept that things aren't going right. What's the most recent, say, mistake, failure, or thing that a team member or you yourself has brought to the table and said, look yeah, I got this wrong, or we could have done this a little bit differently?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So we almost make this into, I won't say a game, I won't say too lighthearted, but we do try to remove the sting of these types of conversations. I myself find that I am constantly admitting these types of things. This morning, I misinterpreted something. You know, I'm on a meeting, I'm on a call, we have a critical issue that's bubbling along and we're trying to find out a little bit more about it. It has the potential to delay something that we're trying to achieve. And when you start talking to other managers about delays, all of a sudden things do get a little bit creepy. But the team in this instance, they brought it to my attention and we're talking our way through it. And what I'm trying to achieve is a level of understanding so that I'm able to relay the story to other people in a clear way. And I am totally not getting it. Like, I've just gotten the wrong end of the stick completely. And there I am in the position of some authority, trying to talk my way through, well, I understand X then follows Y, then follows Z. And it's totally wrong. And you just get to that point where somebody in the team just pings you a quiet message on Teams and basically says, other way around, Martin, you've just taken it up wrong. And the heat of the moment, that's nothing to us. It's perfectly normal to have the most junior team member take you aside and say, you know, you've got that wrong. Yeah. But in hindsight, you know, in the result of this question, you kind of go, well, actually, we managed to achieve a lot where people are able to speak freely to people who might have the title of manager. So that's a kind of an example, but we would routinely hit this. We would plan our work in a certain way that encourages people to admit when they don't know something. So we have a very simple kind of scoring tool that we use to kind of say, well, do you think this is a big job or a small job or a medium job? Yeah. And oftentimes you will find people maybe a little less experienced or a little bit out of their depth will score it very high. This seems like a big job to me because I don't know how to do it. And we've gotten to that point where that would be a regular conversation for us. Then there would be a follow-up around, maybe you need to spend some time on this. Maybe you need some training. Maybe there's a good book or podcast I can recommend. So we find this happens quite frequently, and it's the only way a team like ours can work. It's the only way we can be delivering in a cross-functional way. We all need to admit what we don't know.
Yeah, you've clearly developed that space for people. I think when we talk about anything to do with communications, I think it's to always realize that particularly digital communications, you know, if we need some kind of scale to indicate the urgency of our request. So I could drop you an email. It could be the most important thing in my diary that day. But if I don't convey that to you, you might read it totally different, and that's not your fault either. So there's so many things. I think back like what Laura was talking about, even just listening to each other as well. I'm conscious of the time. I'm going to invite Laura back on as well. And there's a couple of questions coming in there, folks. I'll put them to you. Laura has shared a couple of resources there on the chat function for anybody. There's a link to her article that was published in HBR back in 2017, and also her LinkedIn profile too. There's loads of questions coming in, so I'm going to take a few of these now while we have a couple of minutes left too. Somebody's wondering, Martin, do ACETECH recruit in Eastern Europe and India? I think
actually, we do have resources located in Eastern Europe. They're an extension of the family. So it's an interesting question and presents some of those really interesting cultural challenges. And I mean that in that geographic and, you know, another part of the world type of culture. We do, and we encourage the exact same level of openness. We ensure that we actually meet people. We've traveled to Eastern Europe to work with the team directly and to kind of set some standards around, you know, is everyone okay here? Is everyone, you know, free to speak? You might be the most junior member of an outsourced team. Here's my card, my number's on it, my email's on it. You need anything, you can approach. As part of that continuing culture, our business culture of openness. So to answer the question, yes, we do.
There we go. And Laura, I suppose probably addressed to you, but Martin said, feel free to come in on it as well. How do you make sure that implementing psychological safety doesn't impact performance management negatively, either by managers treading too softly or workers pushing back?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first of all, to realize that in high accountability environments, there is this necessity for a higher level of psychological safety. Because if we think about this as a 4-quadrant model where there's high psychological safety, low psychological safety, low accountability, high accountability, the most dangerous quadrant to be in is when there's high accountability and low psychological safety. Because what's going to happen there? That's when, you know, the aircraft team is building the aircraft, but they don't feel safe to say, hey, we just made a mistake, or this part looks faulty to me. So mistakes or maybe there's a rush, you know, rushing because it's too risky. If they miss the deadline, then somebody's going to get canned, you know? So that's an environment where the higher level of accountability, the higher level of psychological safety, in other words, the need to create an environment like Martin has really nicely outlined. I'm so glad that you gave those examples of, you know, how to speak up, and that it is a no big deal to say, hey, you just missed something. What you were also saying is, it reminds me of in the cabin of aircrafts with pilots that it's just, I've interviewed pilots because they do this so well, of giving active, direct feedback in the moment. You're coming in too low. Nobody takes offense. It's a high accountability environment. Performance is it's not an option to not perform at your best. And yet mistakes can be made that can be extremely detrimental. So to just give that sort of candid feedback in an environment where it's welcome, it's expected, and people know that their performance is not, that's not an option to not perform. But what is also not an option is not to take feedback, to not to respond to changing conditions, to say, I need you to step in here, or whatever it might be. I don't know, I can't, I disagree, there's a problem here. So it's not at all, there's this misconception that performance is going to go down or we're going to go soft. I worked with a leader once who said, okay, Laura, I'll do what you're saying, but don't make me go soft. It's not about being soft. It's actually about being standing up and standing tall and having high accountability, having high standards, and having high standards for conversation, for flow, for process.
Yeah, Martin spoke beautifully there as well about how, in order to try to create those self-managing teams, you have to really try to make sure that you don't create that bottleneck for the manager. And somebody's asked Martin, have your team leaders and managers have actually been taught skills that they need to propagate those behaviors and skills down to the team?
So in terms of teaching, yes, but it's somewhat informal. It's not a case of, we sent you on a psychological safety course and when you came back, everything was fantastic. It's really more about showing the types of behaviors in the moment. It's probably one of the better examples of on-the-job training, to the point where it is explicitly called out. We would oftentimes say, in a zone of psychological safety, let's talk about this. And it lets people know, maybe when they're not used to the idea, that they're in a place where they should speak freely, and that beyond, you know, don't be afraid to speak, there's an expectation that they're going to teach people things that they don't know, and that they're going to point out something that was missed. That the one thing I suppose we do say as part of the, like, again, it's an informal thing, but we don't like the idea of someone coming along a month later and saying, well, I knew that was going to happen. We want to make sure that situation doesn't emerge, that when in the heat of the moment, you were free to say, this is not right. So we don't do any formal training on this. It's very much on the job, but we do call it out, and it is a routine part of our conversations.
Thanks a million, Martin. And folks, I'm conscious of the time. We could keep both Laura and Martin, I think, talking all evening, but we're committed to 5 o'clock anyway. I know people, we still have a bit of routine in our working days, given all that's happened over the last year or so. Again, just huge, massive thanks to both Laura and to Martin for such an insightful content today. And again, the real life examples make such a difference, I think, to all the business owners listening. And for all the participants who are still here, our next webinar will be taking place towards the end of March. Our keynote speaker will be Pádraig Lenihan. He's head of digital performance at Unpost, and he'll speak on the topic of SME digital transformation. It's a huge story, actually. There's a lot more happening with that company than you would believe. So a really interesting webinar. We'll confirm the dates in the next week or so, but keep an eye out on the LOE TV socials and that, and mark that date in your calendar. Thank you all for contributing. It's been great to see so many questions coming in. I'm sorry we couldn't get to them all. We tried to sort of summarize them in this kind of central themes and that. And for both Martin and Laura, the feedback there that's been put in the chat is massive. People have thoroughly enjoyed it. They've learned a lot. You've certainly got people thinking, which really is the objective of these webinars, and why they're entitled to future-proof your business. So good evening. Thank you all for joining in, and look forward to seeing you all at the end of March. Goodbye.